But page 477 at Calvary. You're welcome to stand if you want to. You're not obligated to do so, but you can stand with us and sing if you'd like. Would you open us with a word of prayer?
Father, I want to thank you for this day that we are here to worship and hear the message. Please open our heart and our mind to receive the message to our pastor. I'm going to ask you in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
All right, you can go ahead and be seated. I appreciate you being here this evening. Let me run through the upcoming services really quick because I do need to say about upcoming events, some stuff I wouldn't normally announce on a Wednesday night. So for the upcoming services, the next service this week is an online service. It's the Q&A. We're doing one this week. We'll take a break at Easter weekend, and then we'll come back the next weekend. But the next two we're doing will both be about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. This one's asking a very simple question. Why is the resurrection necessary or so important? You always hear the statement that everything hinges upon the resurrection, and so it's the most important day in human history, so forth. So we're going to discuss that. The other question is, did Jesus say that he would be resurrected? This question gets asked a lot. I'm starting to introduce some of those questions that for me I take for granted. I feel like it's just basic common knowledge. But at the same time, I realize that if I ask a lot of people sitting in church, did Jesus ever prophesy or say he was going to be resurrected? A lot of people would have a hard time answering that question. To me, it's simple. I won't give the answer away because I have a Q&A about it Saturday. So if you want the answer, you have to be there Saturday at 7. Or a little bit after since it's the second question. It is one of those things that to me it's simple. I will probably use it also to talk about prophecy concerning the resurrection in the Old Testament as well. The two preachers joining me, one is Brother Aaron Jenkins from The way his name's listed on Facebook, his wife's name comes first, and so something popped in my head. I had to make sure I was not giving him the wrong name. Aaron Jenkins, but he's the missionary there in Ireland, who's done a few of these already. He always does a good job. It seems like he always gets strange questions, so this time for once he's getting a straightforward, why is the resurrection necessary question. Then I've got Brother Mike Doney, who was one of the 3 speakers who were part of the very first one of these I ever did. He is also going to be back. He's done 1 or 2 since then, I think 1 since then. The problem for him is I feel bad because he always gets the most simple question, the just straightforward basic information questions, no discussion, no anything difficult to him kind of questions. Like his first one I remember was about the age of the earth, and so it's just a matter of running through the Bible and giving the dates and times, and this one's kind of like that too. It's just a matter of saying, well, this verse says this, and this verse says this, and that's it. So I feel bad for him because I don't remember his second question, but it was like that too. So anyways, those 2 fellows are joining me. We will have like I said, we'll have the questions I mentioned. When we come back, the next one, it'll be about the manner of the resurrection in terms of how did he come back and so forth. So that one I think's also got some interesting stuff. Still scheduling my second preacher on that one though. So with those in mind, the other upcoming services, of course, on Sunday we'll be finishing up. Not really finishing up our series. Our series for this month finished up last week. But we'll be dealing with some things that I think go very close with what we're getting ready to do, moving to the new building. I think it's a good time to talk about this. And I want to look at them when they took up the offering to build the tabernacle. I want to look at that on Sunday morning. I have another example of a similar story in the Bible I may preach on in the afternoon, or I may just incorporate it into that message. I'm still praying about that. And then one of the other 2 services will be dealing with fasting in that service, since it goes hand in hand with prayer. And so we'll have to see how God leads in those things. Beyond that, Tuesday, I highly recommend everybody to be setting aside and planning the time. Make sure you can be online with us Tuesday if possible, because Dr. Martin will be speaking. Last time, everybody I know was helped tremendously who's listened to it in any way. I've not met anybody who wasn't helped. I got a lot of really great feedback from that. So this upcoming Tuesday, Dr. Martin's going to be speaking at the 7 o'clock hour on Facebook and YouTube, where I would normally do that. He's going to be doing that. So I encourage you to make sure you're there to hear from him. And then with that said, I can move into upcoming events that we've been talking about a little while, what we're going to have to do as far as how to handle Easter, how to handle moving this church, all that kind of stuff. The government is back and forth every 5 minutes about things, so it's hard to make any kind of plans that are concrete. And so what I've decided on one thing is for the building, we still have stuff that we've ordered that may not get there until the weekend of Easter. So opening on Easter, if we do, we're going to be in a building that very clearly is unfinished. And so what I've decided to do instead is move the church on April the 11th over there. Our last service in this building is going to be Easter. I think it just as fitting as the first service over there being Easter, it could be that the last service here is Easter. We've been in this building for almost 4 years now. June will make 4 years. God's blessed us here and done a lot in this church. Some of you have gotten saved in this building. So I don't want to give this building a poor send off. We'll thank God for it as we celebrate Easter Sunday. But that will mean that on the 11th, even if I've still got a plywood pulpit with no carpet on it and no trim molding on it, we're still moving over there on the 11th. It's settled. I'll work around the chairs. I'll pack them up and move them back per service if I have to finish up. But at this point, the 11th is settled. Now another reason I made that decision is because I've been praying about what to do for Easter, and I finally reached the conclusion that maybe I may be the only one who does this. Maybe nobody wants to participate. Maybe between now and then we go into another lockdown and everything shuts down. Who knows what happens between now and 2 weeks in Belgium. But what I looked at is if you step outside this building, walk over St. Peter's Plain right now, it is like the entirety of the Ghent University is out there in that plain. And nobody's upset with them being in circles of 20 and 50, it looks like in some places. So if they can use those circles to meet in way higher numbers than what they're supposed to be, what I'm proposing is that at 2 o'clock on Easter Sunday, that'll be April the 4th, that allows it to be between both services. So that It's around the time when most people should be leaving anyways from the first service, and 30 minutes before anybody should be coming for the next service. So it's around that time frame. I'm thinking about this a little bit wrong because actually most people leave around 1. So maybe I have to move the time up to 1:30. That's why it's not an official announcement yet. But we'll adjust the time fittingly so that it's halfway between, so that maybe people have to stay a little longer or come a little earlier. I'm going to do a service over there that day. And so it will be an unofficial service. It will be a service in which I did not get permission for, so who knows what happens. But in order to make it as good as we can, we won't do anything illegal. We will use the circles that are already over there on the ground, and people stand in their circles. I'll give you your papers before you go over there, and that way you have them with your songs. And we can go over there and we can sing some songs, give a brief message, spend about 30 minutes over there having a special Easter service like the one we would normally do in the morning in the park. We'll use what they set up over there for the students. We'll use it to our advantage that Sunday. I think if there's any day we ought to be outside celebrating and declaring the glory that Jesus Christ lives, it should be the day of the resurrection as we celebrate that. So not everybody may want to go with me to do it. I understand that. Some people may be afraid that they would give trouble. I don't think they will, but who knows? A lot of times it just depends on who complains. There's some things they turn a blind eye to no matter what. In general, if you complain against bars or students or that kind of stuff, they just tell you it's over, get over it. It can be that the people are going around coughing in each other's faces, and if it's one of those scenarios, most of the time they don't care. Right now it's a little bit different, but in general that's the attitude that I know from living in this neighborhood for 4 years. But when it comes to the church, we have to be careful and we have to be mindful to do things the best we can. So it probably also means wearing masks and stuff, because I assume that over there is still part of the mouth mask zone. So, like I said, just us being wise as a serpent, harmless as a dove, and just trying to exercise our freedom in the only way we can in terms of how we can meet like that and worship. So that's something I'll give the official time, since I just realized that 2 is actually a little bit late for one group but perfect for the other, to maybe split the difference even a little more. And so we'll see how that goes, but I'll set the time so that it's fair for everybody that day. Alright, so with that in mind, let us go ahead and sing page 468. Page 468. I will sing the Wonder Story. We'll do the first, third, and fifth verse. Like I said, the reason I want to announce that tonight about the stuff with the church is because it is a big deal for a lot of people that we're not moving on the 4th, now the 11th. And also, there's a lot of planning maybe some of you have to already start doing, that I give you a week and a half to get ready, not a week, for the Easter thing. Alright, page 468, I will sing the wondrous story. I will sing the wondrous story of the Christ who died for me. How he left his home in glory for the cross of Calvary. Yes, I'll sing the wondrous story of the Christ who died for me. Sing it with the saints in glory, gathered by the crystal sea. Verse 3. I was bruised, but Jesus healed me. Faint was I from many a fall. Sight was gone and fears possessed me, but he freed me from them all. Yes, I'll sing the wondrous story of the Christ who died for me. Sing it with the saints in glory, gathered by the crystal sea. Verse 5. He will keep me till the river rolls Ron, you must not have liked that last verse. He ran way fast. All right, let's go ahead and take our Bibles to 2 Corinthians chapter 8. We're going to finish the chapter today. We said that last week. I said that and I even said as I said it that I hope, because last week I knew that there was a part of the message that just stuck in my heart in a way that once I started, I may get stuck in just the first two verses, and that's exactly what happened. That I intentionally didn't make a verse list, didn't include other verses because I was trying to prevent that, but it still happened. And so tonight I've done the same thing, but I've got to a place where we kind of have to finish this because it is, at this point, certainly one message left to really be taken out of it. Yes, you could do more, but I would like to, at this point, make it one whole message. So we're going to start in verse 18, 2 Corinthians 8, read through to verse 24. And we have sent with him, this is talking about with Titus, the brother whose praise is in the gospel throughout all the churches. And not that only, but who was also chosen of the churches to travel with us with this grace, which is administered by us to the glory of the same Lord, and the declaration of your ready mind. Avoiding this, that no man should blame us in this abundance which is administered by us, providing for honest things, not only in the sight of the Lord, but also in the sight of men. And we have sent with them our brother, whom we have oftentimes proved diligent in many things, but now much more diligent upon the great confidence which I have in you. Whether any do inquire of Titus, he is my partner and fellow helper concerning you, or our brethren be inquired of, they are the messengers of the churches and of the glory of Christ. Wherefore show ye to them and before the churches the proof of your love and of your boasting on your behalf. Father, we thank you and praise you, God, for what you do, and just pray that you would stir in this message. Pray, God, that you would help me, Lord, to deliver your word in a way that I'm not hindered. I pray, God, that you would help me to speak freely. I pray that you'd fill my mouth, my mind, my heart with your word. Help me, Lord, just to glorify you and expound your word to those that are here and those listening abroad. I pray, God, that you would help in this cause, and I ask it in your Son, Jesus' name. Amen. Now, looking at this passage, we saw last week, we paused on simply the idea of thank God for the preacher. And we paused on that idea of him telling them to be thankful for Titus, that he has acted as a pastor to them in this, that he had the heart to care about them, but not just to care about them, to go to them and challenge them. So you see his care and his challenge. That he went to them to challenge them to do good. And we said that within the context of the passage, you would think that when God says to say thank God for the preacher, it's because he's there to do all the nice stuff for you that you like to say thank you for. But in reality, he's saying to be thankful that he cares enough to challenge you. That he cares enough to tell you when you're wrong and push you to do that which is right. Which is not typically the first thing on our mind when we talk about thanking God for a preacher. So having said that then, we move into this passage, and I'm going to say that normally when you have a passage like this where they're unnamed people who are very important to what's going on, I'll do the legwork and go through the Bible and pour over everything I can find to try to figure out who these are. But in reality, these two I did. I put in the time to study it, and what I found is even going and looking at the different beliefs about them, because there's two people mentioned in this passage who are important but are not named. The thing is, their names are not important to this, though. And that's why I eventually came to the conclusion that you can come up with an educated guess, but I don't see where God has given a clear answer as to who either of them are. There are two answers that to me seem very logical. They make sense, they're well-known characters, and certainly fit the descriptions that are given of each man. However, if you walk away from this and still think it's somebody else, then that's fine, because that's not the point of my message tonight, is not to try to prove to you who they are, but to take away the point of why he's referencing them. I do believe that's probably why they're left unnamed, so you don't get distracted by the person in this cause, and focus more on what he says about the person. Because it's almost true that you could apply anybody to this, and the reason why I think that's really important here is because the point of this message should be applied beyond this. This is a message about having confidence in those Christian leaders, those preachers and so forth that God have given to help within the church and help within your life. that I know it's very unpopular today to talk about having confidence in a preacher. Between the stuff like what happened with the Catholic Church, that here most people have written off preachers in churches already. You see that even in America when that all first come out with what they were doing. You see that even now, that there's a lot of people losing confidence in preachers because of the fact that even within the independent fundamental Baptists, narrowing it down just as tight as you can narrow the net, you still find a lot of things where when somebody does something bad, they never have to even answer to God, much less give an answer anywhere. People hide it and move on and just go on past it. And I'm not talking about somebody who does something bad one time. I'm talking about somebody who they repeatedly abuse their position, and there's no reason to have confidence in them ever again, because they for years are abusing a position, whether it be stealing, whether it be perversion, whatever it is. Many times you see this. Me and Stefan were talking about a church in my area where the pastor ran away with his secretary. As far as I know now, he's left her and then married somebody else, moved way past his wife at this point. And the church that he abandoned to do all of this was willing to split and go start another church so that they could have him back as a pastor again. So that's the opposite in some degree of what I'm talking about, because that's all very public. But you have a lot of stuff like that people try to hide it. And so now as a lot of that comes out, people are losing confidence in Christianity and churches, but especially in preachers. So the idea of saying you should have confidence in Christian leaders nowadays is about as unpopular as anything. If any aspect of Christianity is unpopular, that's high on the list of them. So having said that, I think this passage, one of the reasons it's significant that you don't necessarily have to know who he's talking about is because this principle is not limited to the one person. They're just an example of this principle. They're an example of how that what he's getting ready to say about the first guy should apply to any preacher. What he's getting ready to say about the second guy won't apply to every preacher you ever meet, but it applies to the ones who are close to you, because that's what it's about. So saying that, I'll get into the points of what I believe about them. That way maybe that all ties together and makes a little more sense to you. In verse 18, I'll read it again. He talks about the first man. He says, "And we have sent with him the brother whose praise is in the gospel throughout all the churches." Now, the distinction between the first man and the second man is the first man is called the brother, the second man is called our brother. Or, talking about our as in the connection between him and the Corinthians. The first one is about the fact that this guy is someone who has a testimony. He is, in fact, let me even just say it this way. The first one is the approved preacher, the second one is the acquainted preacher. I'll give you an outline right out the bat. That the first preacher is one who's been approved or has been appointed. He is a preacher who has a great testimony. He's highly praised. He comes on great recommendation. He's not somebody who just showed up one day and said, "Hey, I want to preach." The second preacher is someone who has a testimony with them. They are acquainted with him. He is the acquainted preacher. He is their friend. He is their brother. That's the two, and I'll show you why it's more than just tied by the words "the brother" and "our brother." Now, with that though, in terms of who he is, like I say, it's been debated. This has been debated almost the entirety of church history. As long as people have been debating the New Testament, they've been debating who this guy is. Especially this one. There's less debate about the second one. A lot of people just ignore that one. But the first one is heavily debated. However, I think to me the most logical answer is going to be that this is Luke. He says that this is a brother who was appointed to travel with them. Luke traveled with them the majority of their journey. Don't necessarily, that I can remember, think of a place where there's a special meeting appointing him to do so. But Luke was somebody who was with them, seeming to be sent by the churches as a part of this ministry, that he was there documenting. He was almost like the documentarian of their journey, but he was also a preacher and a part of this ministry. In fact, the statement in verse 18 where it says this, that we've sent with him the brother whose praise is in the gospel throughout all the churches. Not the exact wording, but a very similar statement is made about Luke in another part of the Bible. So it would seem to me most evident this first man is Luke. Again, I know people that, some people think who I'm going to say I think the second guy is. They say that he is the first one. And so the second one I'll just go and say I think it's probably Apollos, because it's a preacher that they're very close and attached to. And if you know 1 Corinthians, they were very, very attached to Apollos to the point where Paul had to even rebuke them about being carnal in their attachment to him. So some people think the first one is Apollos because they think he's the famous preacher. What is notable here though is that this is a guy that whoever he is, he has a reputation not just in one church but throughout all the churches. People know that he preaches the truth, that he preaches the gospel, that he's sincere in his ministry, that he has been appointed and approved for this position. He's not a novice who just showed up one day. In fact, you actually could take this passage and use this to teach a lot of the requirements for a pastor. Because in these two men, he's actually a lot of times bouncing off of the ideas of what are the requirements of a pastor. That he's not a novice. That he is someone who's, has a testimony and a reputation, who is, in the community unblameable and so forth, that nobody can raise an accusation against him to say that he's this or that. This first man is an example of that. That they may not know him well. It's not somebody that they necessarily have a close relationship to or maybe have even met at all. But it's somebody that they know of him. It's somebody that any church you go to, if you say this name, you're going to know him. So it has to be someone like unto a Peter, a Paul, a John, or any of those kind of men. However, with any of them, it doesn't seem to be the case because it's somebody who is part of their ministry. So when you boil it down then and say, okay, it has to be a big name preacher, but it also has to be someone who's traveling with Paul. Luke is the biggest name traveling with Paul, who's not him or Silas at this point, or him or Barnabas at that point. So you could almost argue even someone like a Barnabas, but there's nothing that would indicate that. Luke is the most logical choice. But that's why I say he is an example of this, that when you look at a preacher, and if I can explain what I'm getting ready to say, let me include verse 19, because part of what I need to say is in verse 19. It says, and not that only, but who also was also chosen of the churches to travel with us this grace, which is administered by us to the glory of the same Lord, and declaration of your ready mind. So this is someone that the churches had approved and set aside the same way that if you remember when Paul and Barnabas first wanted to go out into the ministry, the church of Antioch had prayed and they put their hands on them and anointed them or ordained them is the term we would use today to go out as missionaries to go and give the gospel throughout the world to the Gentiles. A similar process seems to have taken place for this man, who I'm going to say Luke for my benefit for the rest of the message. That for Luke, a similar process seems to have taken place. That the churches, whether that be at Jerusalem, whether it be Antioch, whether it be a combination of the two, they went through a process of saying, we have seen this man, we know his testimony, we approve him to be a part of this ministry. Now, knowing that though, and looking at what's going on in this passage, there's an important message going on. One is he points out to them that they themselves are part of this when he talks about with their ready mind and so forth. They themselves know his testimony and approve of him as a preacher. In fact, it's almost like, because he's getting ready to deal with money again, because that's what this chapter and the next one are about. It's about their promise to give to help support the church in Jerusalem. So as he's getting ready to deal with money again, it's almost like he's saying, look, you never had a problem with this guy until money come up. You thought he was a good preacher until somebody said something about money. So let's not change our mind now. Let's not have a bad opinion now. You knew in your mind and in your heart he was a good preacher. You never had a problem when anybody said something about him before. That's almost the attitude he has. But there's more to the message, though, of what he's talking about when he's discussing this idea of them being approved and so forth. And this is something that, to be honest with you, is a little bit relevant now for some of you, because you've seen some stuff that people have done across time that are even jokes and stuff people make or ideas people have that it's good for you to understand something. The process of a man being called to preach is not something that happens in a day. A man getting called to preach usually involves a struggle within his heart for a time. That there is a period in which God is dealing with him and putting a burden that I think it was Jeremiah describes it being like a fire in the bones. That you just have to preach. There's something there that I just can't stand it. It's going to eat me alive if I don't preach. I went through this myself, and I'll give a little of my testimony. I went through this myself for about 2 years. I got saved at around the age of 12. God called me to preach about as soon as I was saved. I mean, almost immediately. And a lot of preachers will testify to this. That before I ever got saved, there was something that I wasn't even a Christian. I didn't even grow up in a Christian home. But there was something almost haunting me in the back of my mind about being a preacher. And I didn't even know God. I didn't know anything about the Bible or any of it. And I know a lot of men who've been called into preaching that they can testify to something like that. It's not always the case, though. But what is evident is that there's a time. Well, for some it's very short because they don't fight like I do. Some it's longer than me. But there is a time there when God first starts dealing with a man that he's coming to that realization that this is not just me being uncomfortable, it's not just a bad day, but there is something going on here, that the Holy Spirit is dealing with me on a level that I cannot shake this, nor can I get away from this. That fire in the bones idea that I'm discussing. And for me, It was from around the age of somewhere between 12, 13, all the way up to the age of 15. For around 2 years or a little more, God was dealing with me, burdening my heart. And I got to the place where I was absolutely, completely miserable because I refused to do it. When I first realized what it was, my answer to God was no. I'll go to church, do whatever you want, but I'm not going to do that. Within my heart, that was my answer to God, is I will not do it. And so for 2 years, I fought that, to the point where I got so miserable that I would sit in my floor at night after everybody else went to sleep, and I would cry because I wanted to kill myself. I just could not bear fighting against God. And if you know my testimony, you know what finally ended this for me, was that I was listening to a preacher preach from Acts 9 about Paul's salvation experience and his call to preach. Because Paul had happened back to back, hand in hand. That Paul, it was all and put together as one event. But for Paul, when he's speaking to God there on Damascus Road, and he says, "Who art thou, Lord?" He says, "I'm Christ who thou persecutest." And he says, "What will thou have me to do?" And Jesus is speaking to him. In the midst of all that conversation, Jesus says something to him. He says, "It's hard to kick against the pricks." And if you don't know what that means, the term is referring to the idea that when you're goading an ox or some large animal like that to lead them, you take that goad, that big stick, the end of it is sharpened to a point, it's called a prick. You take it and you push it against their leg and you just jab them with it a little bit. And as you do that, it pushes them in that direction because it hurts. And like you, when something hurts, you try to get away from that. So this big animal, you want to move it, you just poke it a little bit and it moves. But sometimes they're rebellious. Sometimes they kick back against that stick. And when they do, it hurts because it stabs into their arm. You see, for them, it was simple. All they had to do was go in the direction the master was nudging them. But sometimes they refuse to do that. Sometimes rebellion makes us not do what the master is telling us to do. So sometimes we kick back against God's nudging, against that little pain, that little conviction, that stinging that's telling you not this way, that way. That little bit of stinging that's going on there, sometimes we kick back, and when we do, it's just like kicking back against that stick and it's stabbing into the arm and causing a gaping wound at that point. What you find with them, what Paul is being warned of, is this idea that, Paul, look, you have a choice. This is what I've set you up for. You have a choice. You can listen to me, and it's easy. But if you kick back, it's going to be hard. It's going to hurt. You're going to hurt yourself. Not me. You're going to hurt yourself. It's not God who's going to be damaged by kicking back. You're not going to knock the stick out of his hand. You're not going to knock him off of the wagon. You're only going to hurt yourself. That's the point that God is making to him. When somebody explained that to me and I finally got it, I realized that's why I was so miserable, that for 2 years I was fighting that. For 2 years I was saying, no, 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 I won't do it. And the harder I kicked, the more it hurt. The more I kicked back against God's pushing, the more it hurt me. Until eventually I settled in my heart, okay, I give up. I'll quit fighting. I had a Jacob moment where it's enough. Enough is enough. I'll do whatever you ask me. And at that moment, I prayed about it a little more. I went to the pastor of the church, announced the call to preach, began preaching, and been doing it ever since. And I can tell you, it's one of the greatest, most peaceful moments of my entire life was when I finally just quit kicking back against God and done what He told me to do. That's one reason why once God gives me a clear answer, I don't fight with Him anymore. I may pray a lot before I make a decision, but once the answer is clear, I go ahead and do what He says because I know how bad it hurt last time I knew what He wanted and then I didn't do it. Now, what he's speaking to then here in this passage is just a reminder that this is just getting started. This is the bare minimum of what a man who's announced a call to preach should have went through. Is some story of that nature, whether it be as big as mine, smaller or bigger. Something of that nature they went through. Now, then moving on beyond that, there is a time that if he was done right, if he was handled properly as he should be according to the Bible, there's a time where he has trained underneath somebody else, a time where he's studied in the Word of God and he's labored. It doesn't have to be Bible college. In fact, I'll be honest with you, many times Bible college is okay, but it's not nowhere near as effective as a tool as people think it is. For me, I love my friends at the Bible college. I appreciate what was taught, but so much of what they gave me, there's some really good stuff that's helped me along the way, but a lot of it's also went out the door as well. And they admit that themselves, that not everything you get are you going to take it with you the rest of your life. Some of it you're going to change your mind on things and throw it out. Primarily what I'm going to say, and this is really important to understand what he's saying about Luke or whoever this is that his time and preparation for the ministry was not something that also happened in a day. that he has served and he's been faithful somewhere, that God has been training him and preparing him. I mean, you think, would you think is the greatest preacher other than Jesus Christ that you could possibly name to me? And I'll limit it to the New Testament just for sake of argument. You're going to go with Paul. Paul spent time in the desert alone with God training before he started in ministry. Paul had to prove himself to the church before he was allowed to go into ministry. Barnabas had to stick his neck out for Paul and say, look, I know the rest of you are scared of this guy, but I have been a first-hand witness of what God has done in his life, and he's ready to go into the ministry. Give him a chance. Barnabas actually gave up some of his opportunities to give Paul an opportunity. If you don't know the story of the Church of Antioch, the Church of Antioch is the greatest church in the New Testament as far as I can see, what we know of them. And as you look at this church in Antioch, this first church where they're called Christians at, meaning Christ-like, Barnabas is the pastor of that church at the time. And it's growing like a fire. I mean, it's spreading rapidly. And he stops in the middle of this to say, okay, I want somebody to come help me. And he goes and gets Paul. Not somebody who's going to come along beside him and be his assistant, but somebody who at some point is going to surpass him and be the head while he stands back and he's quiet. He lets him do the talking. And it's an incredible thing to see that they saw something in him that didn't just happen in a day, but they watched this across the span of years. And they said, okay, this is a man that God is using. This is a man that God has his hand on. This is the kind of man we want to support. And they invested themselves in him, especially Barnabas. And with time, others got involved as well in supporting him. What I'm saying is almost every preacher. Now, there's certainly exceptions to this because there's a lot of people who damage them by not letting them go through this process. But most preachers you're going to come across who are worth anything have probably been through a process similar to this. At least I can't talk about every denomination, but at least within the Baptist church, a lot of times this is the way it works. That you have a young man, he announces called to preach, or an older man, he announces called to preach. He'll sit in the church, they'll let him preach in their church, they'll get him involved with youth ministries or whatever kind of ministry they get him involved in, send him to go preach at the jail, something to give him opportunity to prepare him and get him ready for all of this and build a testimony so that when the time comes that God moves him into a bigger ministry, he's not just somebody who appeared one day and everybody said, okay, we have to listen to him. He's somebody who has proven himself across the span of years. I mean, you understand that I've been here at this church for 4 years almost, but I've been preaching for around 18 years at this point, going between 18 and 19 years somewhere by now. It's something that God has spent a long time, almost 2 decades of my life preparing me to be exactly where I am right now. It's not something that happened in a day. So the reason I'm saying this is because when you see somebody who gets this attitude, who's never preached, never done anything for God much, who suddenly decides, I'm going to be a preacher, I'm going to go out and start my church to do this. When you hear me laugh and never get intimidated by somebody making a threat like that, it's because I know that ministry is tougher than people think. And it's something that takes time to prepare you. There's a process of this. People who want to go outside of that are people who want to go outside of the way that God has structured and ordained this throughout the New Testament. So when you see a man who's went through these processes, and a man who, for example, if a man is a missionary or a pastor, he's went through something very important. He's went through something called an ordination, which is it's based on the principles of what you see happen with Paul and Barnabas. A group of preachers, because that's what's happening with them, it seems like, a group of preachers has come together, and the way we do it today is they ask you questions about doctrine. Do you believe this? Or what do you believe about this? Okay, well, why do you believe that? Can you prove it to me from the Bible? Sometimes, for me, it was easy because I'm going to admit, everybody on my ordination council were my friends, and they knew me for a long time. They knew what I believed about most everything, and they just didn't have any questions much. On the other hand, though, I've seen people where it's hours. You spend half a day getting intensely questioned about every little detail of what you believe, because if these men are going to ordain you, if they're going to put their seal of approval and say, look, we're going to put our hands on you, we're part of this ministry with you, that when you go out, we're part of this, we're saying, if anybody has any questions, tell them that we said you're worth investing in, that you're a real preacher, that we see in God, we see in you something, that God is doing something. That's what they're doing when they ordain you. That's what I said before about the laying on of hands. It's something that shows that you're approving of and making yourself a part of something. When they laid their hands on Paul and Barnabas, they were doing that. And so a missionary, he's went through that. To be a missionary, you have to go through an ordination council. Again, I'm keeping for Baptists. I can't talk about what every denomination in the world does. But for Baptists, you do that because it means you've been approved. The church has brought together preachers from your area And they have set you down, they've talked to you not just about even doctrine, but sometimes about practical stuff, about how would you do this or this within a church. And they said, yeah, we believe it. This he's straight, he's ready to go, his doctrine's right, he knows how God's going to use him, send him out. And he'd been through that. Again, it's not just somebody who up in one day decided, I'm going to start a church, I'm going to go somewhere and I'm going to do something. It's somebody who has proven themselves through the test of time, through testing, through whatever. They've jumped every hurdle. They've been through the obstacle course and they made it through successfully. And it's usually across the span of years. Every pastor has been through that ordination process. A lot of youth pastors have been through that ordination process. Some preachers who are just doing ministries like preaching in prisons or so forth have been through that process, even though it wasn't necessarily required of them, just because churches have wanted to say that we are behind this person. They're not just out there in their own authority. They're not a renegade or a rebel who decided they're going to throw away everything, throw away churches and go do it their own way. They're doing this with a seal of approval. They have a church behind them. And that's important because a lot of the ministries that I do, for example, as a pastor, should be done under the authority of a church. So as I went out to do them, I have behind me the backing of my church, and now as we built a church here, I have also the support of this church to do those things. Now, I'm not trying to get into the politics of how all that works, but it's to get to this simple point. What he's telling them about Luke is this. Luke is not somebody who just decided, I'm going to come to you at Corinth and I'm going to straighten you out. That I know the Bible better than you and I'm there to straighten you out and correct you on everything. Luke is a man who's been preaching the gospel for some time now. He's traveled with the Apostle Paul. He's ordained by the churches. He has a testimony. It is a witness and known well of those around that this is a man of God and he's somebody who deserves a little respect because of that position and the time he's put into it. I mean, let me put it this way. If you have someone like Sophania, who I don't know if you have any kind of special permits or certifications to be a butcher, but let's pretend you do for now. If you have somebody like him who's put decades of his life into it at this point, you weren't working that for most of your working career, right? Yeah. So at this point, 2 decades of his life have been invested in learning how to do this job. And then you take somebody like me or Eli who's never done this. I've butchered deer and stuff like that my cousin shot or something. But butchered is the right word. It was not a good job, whatever I did to them. When you look at this, and you have me giving you advice on how to do it, you have Eli giving you advice on how to do it, you're going to ignore him anyways. And then you have Sophania giving it, there's a reason why you're going to listen to him over me. He didn't just come in today and decide he's an expert on this. He has proven himself across the span of years. He has been approved. The fact that he's regularly hired and employed in this job, and not just employed at one place, but they give him a job so he can go work part-time at other places. They ask him to come help them because they have confidence in his abilities. There's a reason why you would be foolish not to take his advice when it comes to this subject. He is an expert in this subject. He is proven in this subject. He has tested and tried in this subject. There's a reason why, when it comes to this, if these two want to debate about how to do this job, I'm always going to listen to him. Now, maybe I can twist it from somebody besides Eli, because there's another reason as well. So there's a reason why, even if him and his wife want to debate about this subject, this is one time I'm going to side with him, even though typically I side with Rebecca. Because the point is, he's not a novice at this. This is something he's been through the steps. He's took the training. He's had the approvals. If there's certifications, whatever, all of that's been done. There's a reason why he does the job the way he does. There's a reason why he's an expert at this job. There's a reason why a pastor is not somebody who just got mad and decided to go start their own church. There's a reason why a pastor is not somebody who just walked off the street one day or just got out of Bible college and decided, I'm going to go straighten everybody else out. There's a reason why Luke is not just some preacher who decided to straighten out the church at Corinth. He is a proven man of God who is an expert in this and who is there to help them. That's the thing he's trying to get them to understand so that they would have confidence in him. And he explains the reasoning for it in verse 20 and verse 21. Avoiding this, that no man should blame us in this abundance which is ministered by us. Providing for honest things, not only in the sight of the Lord, but also in the sight of men. So he says, why is it so important that you understand that we sent Luke to you instead of coming ourselves? That we sent Luke with Titus. So it's not just Titus, but Luke is there too. Why was it so important? He says it was done so that they could avoid something. So that no man should blame us in this abundance which is ministered by us. So he's saying that way when he comes to you and says, no, I've weighed the matter, I've looked at this, You made the promise. It's proper that you pay what you said you would. You don't have to get mad at me about it. It's not, it's not just Titus, my messenger, coming there to tell you this. You're not allowed, you can't just get upset because it's me and my buddy Titus fussing at you and telling you you need to pay your debts. No, we sent somebody else who is respected and who he's not just siding with us. He's not just a yes man who's one of my friends. This is somebody who, if he says the answer is yes, it's because the Bible says it's yes. It's because he's looked at this honestly and logically and walked away saying, absolutely, Paul's right, you should do this. He doesn't want them to, when this is done, be able to look at Paul and say, you just sent somebody who was going to take your side. That he wants to be somebody that they can have confidence in him and know he's going to be honest with them and upfront with them. So that also things are done honest, not just in the sight of God, but also in the sight of the church. He's trusting Luke to go in and make sure that this is handled in a way where nobody can say that Paul pocketed the money, that he took it, that Paul took advantage of the church at Corinth, that Paul cheated them in some way, or that Titus was just there. Why do you think, for example, it's important that he notes multiple times that it's not just Titus who's going to get the money, but you pick somebody out of your church to go with him who will also go deliver the money? It's so that in the end, when all's said and done, nobody can point a finger at Paul and say you cheated us or you did something wrong. It's about being transparent, clear, and honest before God and man. That's why so many times I talk to you about stuff that maybe other pastors wouldn't say openly, and maybe they're wise not to say some of the things that I do because of the fact that they've learned that people don't appreciate transparency as much as they should. But I am someone who has lived my ministry all these years on a very strong principle of being transparent. I don't hide things. I'm honest about why I do things. I keep good records of a lot of stuff so that I can be clear about things. That's why even as we make the transition to the new building, I will probably, now that we have an office and stuff and we can do things a little more properly, I'll probably appoint somebody to be a treasurer just to keep account of the offerings and stuff so that it's not just me and maybe a couple others. There's actually somebody that's officially their job, that you can put confidence in them, that they're doing it well. It's some things like this that you do this for the purpose of being honest, transparent, clear about what you're doing. And so as you're looking at these things, that's the point of why he sent Luke, is to show you that people who are appointed to positions don't just get there out of, it's not nepotism, it's not because they're family, it's not favoritism, it's not just because we like them. People who are appointed to positions most time are there because they're the one who's qualified to do it. It's because they've put in the time and they should be the one who's there doing this. If I can put it in terms of a church, there's a reason why God has put me as a pastor of the church and not Eli, not Sophania, not even Nick, or any of these other men. There's no offense to you guys, but even if you started preaching today, you still got almost 20 years to catch up with me. And I'm not trying to be arrogant when I say that, but I've spent 20 years of my life, over 20 years of my life, that the Bible has been my job. You think you studied how to cut meat or how to be an electrical engineer, I guarantee you I've put more time into studying the Bible than even this man who's wrote books on electrical engineering. I'm not trying to be arrogant toward him, but I can guarantee you I've spent more time. I know he spent some time in his college classes where he's probably been up all night, but for 20 years I've studied my Bible in such a way where it's not unusual for me to be up all night pouring my heart and soul into studying it. It's my passion, it's my pastime, it's my job, it's everything to me in terms of that. And there's a reason why God's given me that position. It's part of who I am. It's ingrained into me. So there's a reason why people are in the positions they have. Is one reason he says they have confidence in those leaders. Now, then verse 22, 23, 24, I'm giving to you really fast because I said we're going to finish. It says, "And we have sent with him our brother, whom we have oftentimes proved diligent in many things, but now much more diligent upon the great confidence which I have in you." Now, he says with those two, he sent a third preacher. Somebody who is our brother. Somebody who is connected to Paul and Corinth. Who has proven himself diligent, meaning faithful, meaning someone you can depend on, who's not just faithful, but also fervent in the way they do it. Because diligent is not just faithful. Diligent is active. It's involved. And that's why, for me, Gaius is a name that gets thrown about. It's a good choice. Tychus is fine. Apollos, though, is the one who I feel like it just feels more natural to me because of the relationship with him. He is someone who they love him. Now, Gaius, that's true too. I mean, some of these others, there's other names you can throw up that is just as true. That their connection to him, and in fact, they may make more sense than Apollos, because if it was Apollos, you would think he would say more. But again, the point is not who the preacher is, it's what about that preacher makes them important to this cause. Why should they have confidence in this preacher? And the answer of who this is, whether it be Apollos or somebody else, is that it's somebody who has proven themselves to you over and over again. See, the first point is that you should have confidence in them because of their approval and their appointment to the position, because it shows you that they didn't just happen to walk into this. It wasn't an accident they got here. It's somebody who has spent years of time preparing for this. But the second point is that somebody who has that connection with you, that you know them. So, for example, if I can illustrate this point very easily, when I first come here to Belgium and you didn't know me, there was still a reason why you could have confidence in me. Because somewhere in this world there were churches, lots of churches, who were actively involved in my ministry, whether it be financially, prayer, or even being the church that sent me out under their name to come here and give this ministry. There was a group called Macedonia World Baptist Missions who had invested their time in me and got to know me and said, this is the kind of guy we're willing to support. And Macedonia doesn't do that with just anybody. But through all of this, there were people who had put their approval upon my ministry. And so even before you knew me, you had a reason to have confidence that, okay, this is not just some guy who popped up to start a cult today. This is an actual preacher in an actual church. But as you've got to know me, those things don't matter to you as much anymore. I don't have to sit here and argue with Stefania that he should listen to me as a pastor because of the fact, and I apologize, you keep me an example tonight, but you're the best one for this besides Joe. And Joe is in the back, so she doesn't get used as an example much. But I don't have to argue with him that he should listen to me as a pastor simply because of my qualifications, Bible college, this, whatever. He listens as a pastor or respects that position as a pastor because me and him have had about 3 years together by now. Over 2.5 years we've been here in this church laboring side by side. Out of the 4 years, I said 2.5, 3.5 years, I guess we've had together by now. Almost 4 years. I think I put the numbers too low. But almost 4 years now, 3.5 we've had a little more than that, between 3.5 and 4, that he and I have been in this church together, that he's been a part of it, that he's seen how God's worked here, he's seen what God's done in my personal life, he's seen my own testimony, and there's a reason for him to have confidence in me as a preacher. Is not simply because of what other people say about me, but because of his own experience with me. And the same thing is true for anyone who has spent time with anyone in ministry, that when you look at those people, not just even pastors, but you can apply the same principle to someone like a deacon, that a deacon goes through a process and they're approved for that position for a reason. And then when they are approved for that position, that church that approved them is not somebody who just met them today. They didn't just come in and you're introduced and said, okay, you have to accept them. It's someone out of their church. It's someone they know them well. They have a reputation with them and a testimony. And that's why this preacher is a good example of having confidence in a Christian leader. It's not just somebody who happened to be forced upon you. It's somebody that you know them. It's somebody that you have a relationship, that you're not just going by what other people say about them, but you're going by what you know about them from the time you've spent with them. Then verse 23, whether any do inquire of Titus, he is my partner and fellow helper concerning you, or our brethren be inquired of. They are the messengers of the churches and the glory of Christ. Essentially saying the same thing, applying it back to Titus, that you know Titus. Titus has spent time with you already. You know Titus is an approved preacher, that he has all of my support behind him. That him and Timothy were two of the most approved preachers by the Apostle Paul, to the point that he talks of them like as being like unto sons to him. And he says of these, he's saying of him, if anybody has a question about Titus, know this, that I am saying with all the recommendation I can give, this is the man of God. Anybody asks a question about any of my other brethren I've sent to you, know this, they are the workers of God. That they come in his authority on his behalf. That's why they're there. You don't have to automatically dislike them. There's reasons for you to give them a chance and to give them the opportunity to prove themselves. And I think the prove themselves is important because that's what the next verse leans into. Wherefore show ye to them and before the churches and the proof of your love and of our boasting on your behalf. And he says, don't forget to prove yourself to them as well. He said, the same way that I boasted of these preachers to you, and I boasted of my fellow laborers and told you about these people throughout different letters, and I've recommended people to you over time. He says, they surely, yes, will have to prove themselves to you. And that's why I'm saying give them a chance because they come on recommendation. Give them a chance because they come in the name of the Lord. Give them a chance. But also, just like you expect them to prove themselves, you also prove yourselves. Because I've been talking about you to those preachers as well. I've been telling other churches about Corinth and what God's done there. So prove to them that you are the church that I said you were. Show them your love and how you're going to do what you said you're going to do and all these kind of things. It's a beautiful message there when he ties it up, because in the end, the answer is not just why should you have confidence in a preacher, but why should the preacher have any confidence in you? To prove yourself. The same way he has proven himself over time, the same way he has proven himself to you if he's had time with you, show yourself as well the kind of Christian that when I say, as a pastor, when I say something nice about you, don't make me regret it later when somebody comes. Don't when the next time I have a guest preacher, let him be able to figure out who's who based off of what I said about you, because you prove yourself to be what you were. Always for the good. Don't do the bad. All right, let us close with the word of prayer. Father, we thank you and praise you, God, for what you do. We thank you, Lord, for your blessings and goodness. We pray, God, that you would help us, Lord, as a preacher and myself, to not take advantage, to understand that there's reasons why you command us to have certain requirements and obligations that are put upon us, so that we can have the proper testimony that we need within our church and our community. I pray, God, that for those in the church, that you would help them, Lord, to have confidence. I pray, God, you'd help me to win their confidence, for any that I've not had it or any that maybe I've lost it, Lord, to be able to show the sincerity of my heart and desire to serve you, Lord, to be able to win that back. I thank you, God, for what you do in these things, and I ask it in your Son, Jesus' name. Amen. All right, I appreciate you being here, being part of the service. We finish that chapter as we go into the next one. Maybe I don't have to rush through verses as much to make sure I get it done. But I appreciate you being here. I'm going to let Eli go ahead and shut down the live stream. I say appreciate